They say when you wear Black Power Media gear, you can accomplish anything. You can play any and every position. From coaching, to kicking, to receiving, to running and juking. And, oh my goodness, let's see that again in slow motion. Get off me. And you're going to have a lot of haters coming at you, but what you got to do is you got to shake them off, and get to your goal and accomplish it. And when that's done, it's a beautiful thing. I'm talking about going hard, extra, for that extra point. And when it's done beautifully, you talking about touchdown. Oh, and the crowd goes wild and they're celebrating with you and everything. Man, let's see that again. Nice.
Black Power Media, baby. That's how we do it.
Now go to blackpowermedia.org and get you some of that gear. Empower yourself today. Yeah.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like live right here on Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Very happy to be your host. We're doing this again in between that 4-4, baby, in between that 4-4 schedule, right here in the office vibes. So that's, forgive the artwork, but I think, let's focus on content as opposed to the quality of the aesthetic for that as well. Definitely come on in, jump on in, invite others to join you and be part of this conversation that is going to start with me and our next guest. And then we look forward to Coco joining in, 45 minutes or so, the conversation as well. And time willing, we'll get some of the comments and questions from the chat as well. Please do make sure you are liked, shared, subscribed. The bell for all your notifications is clicked. Make sure you're at blackpowermedia.org, subscribed and following there as well. And all of those things are taken care of. All right. Without further ado, we're going to be joined by the next good amount of time by the author of The Nation on No Map, who is, among many other things, a writer and activist from Birmingham, Alabama. His work has appeared in The Guardian, MTV, Truth Out, British Journal of Photography, and Pitchfork. He is also the co-founder of Offshoot Journal and provides creative direction as producer of the Black Autonomy podcast. His writings have been included in the anthologies Why Do You Serve, Who Do You Serve, Who Do You Protect, and No Selves to Defend. And of course, I'm talking about William C. Anderson, who joins us now. Good morning to you. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So again, I appreciate you doing this. Your name was evoked and brought up, the work brought up. I've had a chance to at least get into some of it and look forward to talking with you about as much of it as possible. But of course, we're talking about The Nation on No Map. But let's just have you break it down for us. What was you do explain some of this in the book, but tell us why you wrote it, what's it meant to convey, and what do you hope that we'll learn from it?
Well, The Nation on No Map is my second book. It's the first book I co-authored with Zoe Samudzi, which is called As Black as Resistance. This book is it's a lot of different things to me. I don't actually find myself categorizing it in one specific way. But really what I wanted to do was to try to come on here and respond to some of the questions and concerns and criticisms that were put forth with regard to this work. I wanted to do this because I think that a lot, or at least some of the tensions among us, could probably be countered by a discussion and a bit of understanding about differences. And that's really a large part of what the work is trying to do, is actually bring some of these tensions to the forefront. I believe that a lot of times over the years, what I've observed is that social media exacerbates a lot of our problems around disagreement. There's a sort of promotion of like careerist influencers and pundits and so forth, especially amongst what gets called the left. And so I'm speaking generally here. This is the environment in which these discussions are had. And this is a place where conflict oftentimes becomes a promotional tool. And so I don't want to feed into any of that here. When I first started organizing as a teenager, one of the things I learned really early on was the importance of having good communication skills. And so I've really tried to distance myself from a lot of what I think amounts to a lot of trash talking and competition and subliminal insults. We're all, on our respective journeys, and many of us are simply doing the best we can with whatever tools we have. So with regard to this book, I would say the first thing that I would want everyone to understand is that The Nation on No Map is not simply a history book or a manifesto or something like that. It's almost like you're reading my journal at times if you read the book closely. The first words you hear from me in the introduction make it pretty clear what's happening with this text. So the original segment that you had with Coco offering a lot of the criticisms, there were, a lot of comments that were made, and there were a lot of questions that were raised. And I know that, towards the end, it was basically the three of y'all were talking, and I know that two of you hadn't actually read the book yet. So a lot of things kind of came out and snowballed that were very speculative, and that were, there was things that turned into kind of speculation about the work. That's actually dealt with in the first 10 pages within the introduction. And so I want to actually do some of that sort of excavating here myself. And I want to actually read some of it directly to you, since I felt like it got disregarded in the previous discussion, and then follow up with some other elements of the writing that I've done surrounding this text, just for additional clarity. So,
okay, sure.
So is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. So I'll respond to a lot of the things that were, said to be contradictory toward the latter half of what I'm going to talk about here. I'll just respond to it directly because I got, I watched the segment twice. I listened very closely to all the things that were raised and that were concerns. And so once I get through some of these like introductory pieces around this text, I will try to follow up in that way. And I will also say about this text, this is a book that is difficult for many reasons and frustrating, and I think maybe even potentially angering for people if you think that you have certain things figured out. And what I mean by this is, if you are someone who is very devoted, if you're maybe doctrinaire in certain ways about your views as it relates to any sort of self-described leftism or radicalism, this book probably won't feel good. And that's something that could go for anyone, including anarchists. And I want to unpack that specific aspect why I say anarchist there too, as well. So it just depends. It depends on who you are as a reader. And I also want to say too that I'm not, when I talk about a lot of these issues and a lot of these tensions, I'm not speaking for all Black anarchists. There is no such thing as what Black anarchists think, because many of the things that we like, anything else we know in terms of ideology, there is no one universal line of Black anarchist thought. You have various strains of Black anarchist thought. For example, some Black anarchists may be open to certain things like nationalism in ways that I'm not. What I try to clarify here are some key aspects of some of those tensions again, and some of those issues, and try to dig deeper so that we can all push our consciousness further. So I want to read a few parts of this introduction that I wrote, and they're going to address a good chunk. They're going to address a good chunk of some of the things that were raised in the last segment that Coco had. I'm not going to bore you with too much reading. I just want to hit a few sections here. It's not going to take me long.
It's cool. And just for those in the chat, while he's pulling this up, if you missed it, the original conversation being referred to is linked in the show description, as is the full bio to Anderson. Just FYI. Anyway, yeah.
Cool.
Please go ahead.
So the first part that I want to read here starts as such. This project of mine, which I hope you'll give a chance, is not about defending some sect, protecting an institution. It's about some realizations I've had that I'd like to share. Various Black anarchisms and Black autonomous politics have been helpful to me as an aid in understanding some of the hurdles we face. They've helped me do this with more precision than other ideologies I've come across. This contribution outweighs many, but it does not eliminate that which came before it. Many of the things I critique in this text are positions that I held before I ever entertained anarchism. So much of what's being said here is from lived experience and not mere projected feelings. I only use the misnomer anarchism to outline certain principles that I don't compromise on, but it's really a placeholder. I don't run from it, as one of my teachers once said, but it's also something that I don't run to. Emphasis on to. What does it mean to respect something or someone enough to be able to let go and work to transcend for the sake of liberation? Really, this writing is trying to help people in ways that I feel I have been helped. And if the help is hindered by the devices I use, I'll have to go figure out what's next, won't I? When Aimé Césaire wrote his famous letter resigning from the French Communist Party, he said something that stays with me. And quote, "I believe I have said enough to make it clear that it is neither Marxism nor communism that I am renouncing, and that is the usage some have made of Marxism and communism that I condemn. What I want is that Marxism and communism be placed in service to Black people, and not Black people in service of Marxism and communism. That the doctrine and the movement would be made to fit men, and not men to fit the doctrine or the movement. And to be clear, this is valid not only for communists. If I were Christian or Muslim, I would say the same thing. I would say that no doctrine is worthwhile unless it is rethought by us, rethought for us, converted to us. That would seem to go without saying," end quote. That's Aimé Césaire. With that being said, we should avoid service to ideology and let all that we can gather from different ideas work in service to us. There is a collection of thoughts here. I want to put emphasis here again. There is a collection of thoughts here across the spectrum of what we call the left, and from radicals and thinking people of all sorts. I draw inspiration from many, but seek no converts, nor do I want to testify to my own conversion. Any passion you see around my use of principles and concepts is the joy of thinking that we may be that much closer to helping ourselves attain true liberation. I want us to get there, not just talk about it or dream about it. If I'm going to use paper and other resources to publish this text, I don't want to be wasteful. If you'll allow me, I'd like to tell you what my teachers have taught me and share how I've internalized it. The next thing I say in another section is, I see no point in fueling fruitless debates while the world is in turmoil. One who should rightfully be set up. However, there's great importance in lighting fires of urgency in anyone who should rightfully be fed up with sick, sorrowful society. The next part that I want to highlight, I also say, I'm not working to make Black anarchism appealing for academia, sanitize it for liberals, or make it a symbol voided of any real purpose. Anyone doing such things and mentioning my work in the process has nothing to do with me. I'm not here to be another loud leftist, vanguardist man barking like I am a general and everyone else is in my army, nor am I here to build a brand for myself. I do think there are things we need to be doing, but when we make such suggestions to readers, it is, I hope, but when I make such suggestions to readers, it is, I hope, in support of liberation, not any desire to be considered a leader. There's a couple more parts I'm gonna hit, and then I'll talk about why I brought them up. So I will mention people throughout this text who educated me about things I needed to know. Some I outgrew, don't agree with, and depart from at times. The point is, they taught me, and I'm speaking for myself through my writing. And lastly, the last part of this introduction I want to hit. I say I want to acknowledge that there are other Black radicals who already embrace much of the history, thought, and conclusions that I arrive at. It is not my intention to disrespect anyone who I don't know enough about yet, but I extend my love and solidarity to anyone who hopes to struggle together. I've shared commentary from thinkers who have an adversarial relationship with the past, as well as those who are more open to what it can represent. I think the truth is in a synthesis of both of these positions. I also realize that I sometimes make points by using writers who arrived at very different conclusions from mine. What people like Lucy Parsons, W.E.B. Du Bois, Karl Marx, or C.L.R. James thought, of course, changed over time. I'd only like to point out that these transformations, whether I agree with where they led or not, represent a deeper core insight I feel we can see in the method of many Black anarchic and autonomous movements. We evolve and make use of what works for us, not as a means of repeatedly reinforcing our own doctrines, but to create new revolutionary potential. We're on a journey, and it's best to travel with the willingness to think critically for the sake of growth. This isn't about absolute truths or answers as much as it's about moving towards an active response to the problems that threaten our lives. So those few quotes that I wanted to hit from the introduction, I feel are priming the reader and telling folks who pick this text up that it's not going to be a dogmatic text, and I'm not going to read these influences, these thinkers, these people who are pushing my thought, and just say I'm going to draw the same conclusion just because they did. I'm also trying to give some background about how I got to the place that I did. And one of the things I let you know from the beginning is that I'm not coming to this work as someone who is just thinking about it strictly from some academic perspective or from a scholarly perspective in any sort of traditional sense. I come from a working class background. I tell you at the beginning of this text that I spent the majority of my life doing janitorial work, and that I started organizing when I was a teenager, and I've been in the movement for half my life at this point. Different struggles, different organizations, and different time. So in the last segment, it was suggested that I am sort of selectively quoting radicals and thinkers to make my points. But the whole point of me not being a dogmatic writer and not having an ecclesiastical relationship with theory is that I feel that there's a balance that has to be struck between novelty and the retrospect. And I don't overemphasize either in this text. I learn from something what I can do when I look at the context and the conditions and the authorship and take as much into consideration and draw my own conclusions. So I don't, like I said, I don't believe that anybody that we read, just because they draw a certain conclusion, that it means that we have to arrive at the same conclusion. We have to look at the context, and we have to look at the conditions in which they were writing and thinking. So I found it sort of odd that there was this assumption that I don't know potentially or don't recognize C.L.R. James, for instance, in this text as a Marxist. He was an autonomous Marxist, and that's exactly why I cite him. He was unorthodox in many ways, and he was an iconoclast. That's also why I'm working with Césaire, who I just quoted in the introduction, and talked about his resignation from the Communist Party. I have no qualms with Marxism. I'm critiquing what people do with Marxism and left ideologies across the whole spectrum, not just Marxism, anarchism as well. And I quote Marx all throughout this book to make that point. Marx is one of my favorite writers of all time. He's one of my biggest influences because Marx himself was an unspoken critic of dogma and the religiosity that many bring to Marxism and its ideological offshoots. So I'll say that if we're going to bring Black anarchism into it more specifically, one of the foundational thinkers of Black anarchism, the Black anarchist Martin Sostre, had a revolutionary bookstore in Buffalo, New York. And I think that he's a great example in this regard. He sold all types of radical text at this very pivotal bookstore that he had that was ultimately targeted, and it landed him in prison as a political prisoner. But at this bookstore, he sold text that was by Mao. He had text by Nkrumah. He had Malcolm in the store. He had Robert F. Williams and other people who he'd depart from ideologically in many ways. He was originally inspired by Che Guevara, and he called the bookstore a foco, but only on a small scale. And he emphasized this deep, wide study that people should be participating in. And the trajectory of his life is very interesting to me because, as I mentioned in this book, he went from being a Black nationalist to being a Marxist-Leninist before he arrived at anarchism. And he warned about people who follow what he called the captive wooden party line. And he saw political action not as something that he said was like some abstract political line. So this is the example that I'm building off of here. This is somebody who's taking the whole spectrum of the left into consideration to build their politics, to build their analysis. And this is the influence, this is the example that I draw from in many ways. And another way I can even talk about that, by the way, y'all mentioned, I think, Nicaragua passingly and nationalism in the last segment. A fun fact about Martin Sostre and his comrade Sandy Shevak. Sandy Shevak were training young people in New Jersey on how to have technical skills, and they were teaching them how to build refrigerators and repair refrigerators, and they were sending them to the Sandinista Liberation Front. And this is just an amazing piece of Black anarchist history there that is fascinating to me when you look at the broader spectrum of the history. And you can learn more on martinsostre.com. We've been doing some amazing stuff with his history with the Martin Sostre Institute. You can also follow on Twitter. But yeah, I'll stop talking for a second here before I keep going and just see if everything's making sense.
Well, I mean, for me, I'm a little unclear what the specific criticism is that you wanted to clear up. But if I could, and maybe this will help, there's one new bit of criticism that I have, having read at least a good portion of the book, that I would just use as an example is, and that may be part of what you're speaking to, is that so it's one thing to say, to a certain extent, depending on how exhaustive a book is, there's always going to be some form of cherry picking of quotes. I mean, to help anyone make our argument. But for instance, when you talk about your problems with Afrocentricity in the book, even as someone who would probably not qualify as an Afrocentric or an African-centered, one of the things that bothered me a little bit in that was that I would have liked for you to do more to explain. Like, see, what I want to see is this is the breadth of African-centered thought. Here are the arguments within African-centered thought. Here is where Afrocentricity, as defined by Molefi Asante, fits in. And here's what's wrong with it and why I want to move beyond it. As opposed to what it seems that you did here, just sort of passingly take shots at some very popular and I think often misguided notions about what Afrocentricity really is, especially in its breadth, to get to a point that you wanted to make that may in fact be correct. So to the extent that you may be seen as doing that with other fields, that I think would be something that I would benefit more from. In other words, here is the full flaw, as I see it as the author of Marxism, and this is why Black anarchism is better. This is the full flaw as I see it. In other words, give these fields, in this case, African-centered thought, its due credit, then knock it down. To build up what it is so for instance, that would be one thing that I would have I'd still like to see done more to get to the point that I think you are trying to make, and what I do vibe with, which is that, as I've summarized it, I want us to win. So if we need to get past certain labels and lanes and dogma, that's cool. But to get there, I would like to see more substantive critiques of these fields. So that would be just one. I'll stop there and let you come back in. And then you can let me know when you're ready for Coco to come on. And then if she's ready, she can jump in when you're ready. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Cool. I can try to respond to that in a more roundabout way, I think, through some of the other points that I'll try to make here. I think, I think it would be good to point out that I imagined and predicted some of these reactions that this book would elicit. So I published two sort of almost like pre-responses to a lot of these things. One is through my publisher upon the release of the text, and I wrote it back in November 2021. And it's called Deeper Than Politics and More Than Ideology. And I open it by saying that if there's, one thing that I've learned about Black anarchism, it's that it's to transcend, and that I'm not simply a Black anarchist because I'm trying to systematize it or institutionalize Black anarchism. And I also say that I'm not wed to it, and I'm not dedicated to anything like that, because the entire point for me is not to be. One of the central themes of this text is to move against representation politics and transcending limitations. I think that a lot of the left feels like they've risen above it, and maybe that they don't do this in the way that liberals embody it. But I think that they do it on a lot of segments of the left do this on a different scale. And what many Black leftists are rooting themselves in politically is a different sort of ideology that uses race, nation, and state, much like liberals do, but on different terms. And I think that also, you have to point out that where the binding material for a liberal might be a fantasy around mythology and race and sort of this admiration and service to U.S. empire, much of, I think, the Black left uses these same categories to almost identically at times in service to racial ideologies and states and nationalisms and patriotisms. But I think the difference is the hegemonic power that we observe on a global scale, and what strength the U.S. empire and the West have doesn't necessarily make something that we might glorify that's countering it just inherently benevolent. So because I think that because people have done this for so many decades, that we have this anesthetized sort of movement that's high on a uncritical image of itself. And so Black anarchism is a critique of classical anarchism as much as it's an evolution and an extension of anarchism. And that's a basic first step, I think, that is good to recognize, and that it transcends much of the left because it critiques the whole and it reads it in its entirety. And so I will jump into some of the critiques that I do want to clear up that were made that y'all just made by Coco that y'all were discussing, and then we can just talk about it all pretty openly. So the first point that I wanted to bring up was intercommunalism, because I know that y'all were going back and forth about intercommunalism for a minute, and intercommunalism, according to the Black Panther leadership that I'm referencing, is not nation building or nationalism. The BPP was not, obviously was not one thing. It was an organization that was made up of different chapters with different orientations to people that people now, I feel like, try to claim to different ends. But eventually the Black Panther leaders articulated an explicitly anti-nationalist stance based on the theory of intercommunalism. And it was an ideological position that was brought to life by the labor of rank and file Black women within the party. This was an ideological and philosophical position that was advanced by the party under the leadership of Newton and Seale. And Newton lays out his thinking in this speech that he gives at Boston College in 1970, where he says, nationalism plus socialism was contradictory, and what was needed was a higher level of consciousness. And I'll come back to that in a second. But in 1972, Bobby Seale had a televised interview with John Lennon, actually. And he said in that interview, he said, we're not nationalists. He said, we don't believe in nationalism. He said, nationalism or nationhood is akin to superiority. He said, it's akin to racism. And he said, and it's akin to sectarianism. And in that same interview, he talked about seeing the world as dispersed communities and the technological and economic reasoning behind doing so. The reason I think that this is important is because he was advocating for building capacity outside of the national state form that in many ways, we could liken to a sort of almost international way of thinking about mutual aid. And the Panthers were also recognizing the global nature of capital and the world's ruling elite not being concentrated in just one place. So the significance of that happening was because of the proliferation of post-colonial independence struggles. And this is the post-World War II era dominance of what gets called the nation state or the national state. So what I'm talking about is the arrival of national sovereignties, nationalized sovereignties, organizing the map and borders, as opposed to imperial sovereignties. This shift from the imperial state to the nation state that happens post-World War II. So, state socialist projects were aiming to take, on this building of national socialism that would attempt to bring about socialism through the state form. And there was a shift again from those imperial states to this explosion of independent nation states throughout the world that marked a global transition in the market. With nationalism, came a new wave of immigration restrictions and borders and the exploitation of labor. There also came a greater expansion and flow of capital that was coalesced by, the influence of neoliberalism. So next, I'll say, I'll go to saying, in 1972, almost 30 years after 1945, many of the things that had changed during the independence era, Fanon had warned early about the risk of the national bourgeoisie and conflating national consciousness with nationalism. And he knew that the national elites could and would, often manipulate people. And he warned about the trials and tribulations of national consciousness and wretched, and insisted that people realize that power is in their hands when you go from, when you go through this transition, realizing that the power is going to lie in the hands of the people. And so when I was thinking about what Coco was saying with regard to Nkrumah and nationalism and quoting the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, in those terms that Huey and that Seal were speaking in, which I quoted, you can see this transition and moving away from this idolization of the national state. And then if we want to talk about Walter Rodney as well, because I know that was brought up as well, like my reference to Walter Rodney, there's an interview in the Black Scholar where Walter Rodney said something that I wanted to maybe get into a little bit and read here why I was quoting him in this larger conversation about nationalism and the state. Walter Rodney said, let me pull this quote up here that I wanted to share. Walter Rodney said, quote, we have allowed illusions to take the place of serious analysis of what the actual struggles are taking place on the African continent, what social forces are represented in the government, and what is the actual shape of society. We made the same mistake about Kwame Nkrumah, and were very surprised when he was overthrown because we thought that everything was fine in Ghana and that the CPP and Nkrumah had things perfectly under control. And we woke up to the subsequent overthrow and we woke up subsequent to this overthrow to a realization that there was a class struggle developing in Ghana, that there was it was a natural consequence of that struggle that this particular stratum emerging was a petty bourgeois class around the Ghanaian state, that a petty bourgeois class around the Ghanaian state should not act against an option which seemed to threaten them with or without direct intervention of imperialism, end quote. And so in that same interview, he explained something, which is why I quoted aspects of international class struggle in Africa and in the Caribbean and America. He addresses the Sixth Pan-African National Congress. Now, mind you, I quoted two very important people on both sides of Walter Rodney in the book. The first person who I quoted is a man who befriended him named Modibo Kadali. And this is the Pan-African social ecologist who is a friend of his and who was a thinker who still draws from him in many ways. The other person I quoted on the other side of him was UC Kwayana, who's a giant of Pan-Africanism, who's still alive at almost 100 years old, who was known as the Sage of Buxton in Guyana. They are both a part of this story about a refusal to grant those who are not government officials a certain place in the Sixth Pan-African Congress. Those delegations that didn't get that representation that led to certain people boycotting the Congress. Rodney spoke out about it, and he said that the dominant mode of thinking in Africa today is inherited from the colonial masters and is given currency through the state apparatus. So Kwayana, who's Rodney's older contemporary, had said this a couple years before in a book that he wrote called The Bauxite Strike and the Old Politics. And he was saying that the new rulers have new political slogans, but they're carbon copies of the old colonial officials and their actions. And I also quoted Sylvia Wynter towards the end of the book, who was also in Guyana at the time, and she witnessed the failure of the Marxist project there. And she talks about how it was going to be dependent on people doing more than just trying to organize the state differently. And so when we're talking about intercommunalism, and which is a central theme throughout this text, it's something that I'm working with throughout this book. What does it all mean? It means that, the nation and the state are different. But when we're talking about the nation state, intercommunalism is absolutely not nationalism because it was not theorized in that way. And nationalisms that have lent themselves to the post-colonial development of the nation state form, which was dominating by the 70s. It is a form that the West and national bourgeoisies used and exploited to enrich themselves and extend capital and suppress labor, deny revolutionary representation, denying people who had revolutionary politics representation. And so I wanted to address that because I know that when y'all were having the conversation about it, that, that there was this assumption that maybe what I was talking about in terms of intercommunalism could just be nationalism. But I wanted to just specifically address what the Black Panther Party leadership was saying that intercommunalism was for themselves. So that was just one of the things that I wanted to clear up.
Okay, so maybe with your permission, we can invite Coco to join us because we are at 11:45, and so let me just say this, because even after hearing you in that last response, I think that going back to my previous question or comment, that this is where the criticism comes in, and maybe I'm wrong here, but Coco can offer her views and whatever. And I actually was thinking as you were just wrapping up there, that this is, I think, a mistake and I'm maybe projecting here because this is, I think, a mistake that I made or a shortcoming of my own work, particularly my first book, that in my own attempt to develop an analysis or an argument in favor of internal colonialism theory, I made a lot of reference to a lot of people's thought from a lot of different perspectives, but didn't do enough in each case to outline each of those fields, each of those thinkers' perspectives, and to demonstrate either the shortcomings of their analysis or how those shortcomings in their work or their own eventual evolution may have pointed them to my own conclusion. So that's where I think, and that's sort of the point I was getting at about African-centered thought, that in whether it's Rodney, whether it's Sylvia Wynter, or any of the other people you named, or any of the other perspectives that you reference, internal communalism, Newton, the Pant, etc., there are so many different responses and arguments and perspectives that would have or could be brought up or be brought to bear in response to your own criticism that would suggest that could be argued that either there's a misreading on your part, or that you are extending you're projecting conclusions onto their work or their eventual evolution that may not be in fact fair to them. Ultimately, what I'm saying is that I think more needs to be done to explain why Marxism is flawed, why different thinkers whose perspectives on Marx was itself correct, or how, for instance, it seems that you're saying had Walter Rodney not been exploded in a car bomb, he would have eventually landed on Black anarchism. Like, those are steps that I think I didn't see taken in the book, and I think would be more helpful and fleshed out because ultimately that's where I do feel you, is where you're saying at the beginning of the book, and even as you read earlier, I'm trying to get us past dogma so that we can win. Again, that's my oversimplification. And I really feel that. But I do think, to be fair, and it's not just saying, to be fair to all of these different people, to these wings of thought, fields of thought, that more needs to be done to explain why there are flaws there or shortcomings there. And I don't, by the way, think it's just an academic thing. And maybe that's a bone I'll pick with you and others another time. I think there's a false dichotomy developed between working class and struggling perspectives in the academy, when in fact I, and like many of my comrades and colleagues, are ourselves coming out of that same class and political perspective. So it's just, I think that the idea that intellectual rigor be brought to these things is of great value, to these fields and these concepts is of great value, whether we're in the academy or not. Anyway, so Coco, I think you already have the link. If you're ready to join us, please do. But until that occurs, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Hold on one second.
Go ahead. Sure, go ahead.
I'm not there yet.
Okay, my bad. I was trying to go by your clock. Okay, fine. We can remind her to hold up. Go ahead.
So the first thing I want to say is I think you missed like the whole point of me reading those parts from the introduction that I read. Have you finished the book? Did you actually finish the book?
I read the beginning, a chunk of the middle, and then the end. So technically I did finish it, but I haven't read every page. No.
Okay, so I think that it would be good to read the whole book, all
Sure.
the pages of the book, before you draw certain conclusions.
Just to be clear, I haven't drawn any conclusions, and I've only on the part of about African-centered thought did I raise a potential problem with your method. That's all. But I haven't reached any conclusions, so you don't need to put me in any camp there. Just go ahead and make your point. It's cool.
But you were just saying that I'm talking about Marxism being flawed. I didn't say anything about Marxism being flawed in the book anywhere. I don't say that anywhere in the text. I'm not arguing anything about Marxism being flawed. And I was specifically pointing out by quoting that part in the introduction, as well as the surrounding text that I mentioned that I published with my publisher, that I told you I published these sort of like pre-responses. I'm not saying Black anarchism is better. This is not an ideological argument. So these ways that I think that you're talking about that I should approach and that I should be thinking are not necessarily my method, because that's not the type of thinking that I'm trying to engage in. Those aren't the type of
No, I'm just trying to. No, my point was in bringing that up was to say this is where I think people's criticisms come from. Because if people read and they see, again, you could say I'm not being critical of Marxism, but and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying you're clearly making an argument that Marxism is insufficient. That's the whole point of referencing people's points about it being insufficient, and you yourself moving beyond it. So and all I'm saying is, and that's why I did stick on the point where the section that one that I know I read carefully, is that's why I was saying, if you're addressing whether it's Marxism or intercommunalism or any other ism in the way that you passingly did African-centered thought, that's where I'm saying I could see the criticism coming in. Because and despite your introductory comments, despite if people are reading your book and saying, even with his admonitions at the beginning, he's making an argument. The book is making an argument. And in the passage of making that argument, you are referencing, making use of all of these people and ideas. And I think at least in this one instance that I'm referencing, not giving it its fair due. So that's why I'm saying, even if it's not your method, other people will be reading it with whatever method they're applying and still just being maybe, and I think that's what Coco was doing. He's saying, I'm reading his book. He's making an argument, but I'm seeing him not address fully or accurately these different isms. So that's why that was why I was suggesting or making the point, even being self-critical of my own work, that this is something that maybe is unavoidable. Maybe it's just I don't know. But that was my only point in bringing it up. It wasn't to say that I had reached a conclusion or anything. It was just to say that this is maybe why there is criticism, or why Coco had some. That's it.
Okay. Well, again, I would say when we're thinking about a lot of those questions and concerns that were raised, I think that there just has to be this ability for us to hold the weight of difference.
So let me be more clear. So I'm sorry to cut you off, but just to be more clear, like for instance, when you're doing if an uninitiated person reads your book, they would be easily convinced that Umar Johnson and Cheikh Anta Diop are the same thing. And in service of the field of Afrocentric thought, or they would think Dr. Clark and Molefi Asante are the same thing. And in doing that, and when that occurs, it allows for, again, whether it's flawed or not, the breadth of thought that is considered Afrocentric or African-centered, it is itself misrepresented and misunderstood, and therefore not clarified in its flaws, even as you want us to get to, if it's not anarchism, something else. Does that make sense? You see what I'm saying there? Does that make sense?
I think that's an assumption that I wouldn't make. I don't think that I'm drawing any sort of broad strokes that would make anybody conflate those two so easily. And I would also say that
when you reduce Afrocentrism, and when you quote Hortense Spillers and others, you reduce it to just this silly identity thing that we were all kings, and that's actually, you make a point that I really agree with. I've always said my ancestors was not kings. My ancestors were the ones sweeping up the floors and digging the ditches. But my point is, but when you just passingly, and the only people you have commenting on African-centered thought are the people who are criticizing it as an identity reductionist thing. And I think it's in its best. It is way more than that. And that's why I was saying somebody could read it as just, oh, he's talking about Umar, and not understand that there is a Cheikh Anta Diop, just to give two bookend differences off the top of my head. But that's all. That's yeah.
I mean, what I would say to that is, I think that there has to be a little bit of respect given to the fact that these chapters that I'm working through in this text is a relationship with the negative aspects of many of the things that I'm talking about. Okay. So I'm not trying to necessarily build a more expansive text in the way that you're talking about, because I was trying to make a pretty concise point about how I arrived at this place of reading Black anarchism the way that I do. So I think that some of the things that you're suggesting that I could have done would not have been the point of why I wrote this text or what I was trying to achieve by writing this text.
Right.
And again, like I said, I'm not trying to convert anybody to anything. I'm not trying to make them a Black anarchist. I'm telling them how Black anarchism is informing the things that I'm reading about, that I'm thinking about, that I'm sitting with, that have personally influenced me, and that I see us having conversations about in the everyday world. The other thing too, I want to say, with regard to the point you raised about the university, I have that problem too. And I wanted to bring that up. And I didn't understand why you, as an academic, when in the last conversation, there were these suggestions that were thrown out about academics. At one point, Coco was saying all some people do is sit behind the screen and write and make, and there was sort of this, it felt like there was like this undertone that like I was potentially some detached academic or scholar or something, and I just wanted to address.
And I went along with that. I went along with that.
You definitely went along with it, and I didn't. I didn't
about you. How would I have been? I don't know you. How would I have been? Oh well, maybe I need to go back and look too.
You were moderating the conversation, and I didn't understand, because the reason I said that I'm not an academic is not because I have a problem with academics. I'm not one of these people online who cast these blanket statements about academics. I have no problem with academics. I've learned a lot from academics. So I don't make these blanket statements. Look, listen, like we need investigative journalists, we need writers, we need scholars who spend all their time uncovering and exposing the evil of the forces we're up against, who spend a lot of the time sitting behind screens and writing. And I hate that their labor is discounted in a way that I don't imagine anyone who's trying to build anything will be successful doing without these sorts of people. And so, there's a bunch of labor actions happening right now across the country on university campuses that we know about. This is a whole class of workers, of people who are in newsrooms, who are in academia, who, when we cast out these blanket statements and make disparaging comments about people who are writers or who are academics, I think that it does a disservice to recognizing the diversity of the different types of people that we need to contribute to struggle. And so what you were just saying, I completely agree with that too. And I was wondering why you didn't push back on that during the conversation.
I'm wondering too. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't. I don't know. Maybe I got lost in thought. Maybe I missed it. I don't know.
Because at the end of the conversation, and we can bring Coco on since I'm talking about Coco's points this much, but like the last thing I'll say to that piece was, I watched that talk that Dr. Conadu did on the channel. I had seen it multiple times. I watched that talk that y'all did, and there was this kind of way that it was being pushed, or that it was being assumed, like, is he doing anything that's worth anything? Is he doing anything that's of any worth or of any substance? And I felt that it was disrespectful, because it's like there's this way that we talk about writers and about academics and about journalists in this way that I feel is really oversimplifies and disrespects the diversity of types of people we need in struggle. We need people in struggle and in movement that are janitors, that are caretakers, that are cooks, that are artists, that are academics, that are journalists. Marx was a journalist. Marx was a writer who sat around writing all the time. So many of the revolutionaries that we talk about were people who spent a bunch of their time writing and went to prestigious universities in the West. And so it's like we can't get into this way of talking about history and thinking and contribution to struggle and revolutionary struggle, radical struggle in this way that minimizes their contributions. And I just wanted to say, I agree with you on that. I was wondering why you did. I was going to ask you that when we were talking today, why you didn't address that.
I don't know. I wish you would have said, and if I doubt I'll go back and watch the whole thing, but if you ever see a timestamp, send me a timestamp. I can't, I don't know. It doesn't sound like me. So I don't know.
Yeah, we can. But
anyway,
I'm happy to.
Yeah, Coco, if you're ready, jump on in and join the conversation. While that is, let's see. While that is, and I'm sure I sent the link. I hope Coco is still there and available. Oh yeah, Coco says getting set up now. So while that is happening, there was one other, where's my notes here that I will ask you real quick. So I made a note here on, let's see, on page 20, what was I thinking? So you said, as previously stated, a Black anarchist lens helped develop the language I used to describe our condition in this country. In 2017, I co-authored an article with Zoe Samudzi. Am I saying that name right? Yeah. The anarchism, quote, the anarchism of Blackness. This was the term we used to describe the statelessness experienced by Black people in the United States. Our position was that Black people are residents in, but not citizens of, the United States, a condition that has potential to prime Black people for an insurrectionary set of politics should they choose to embrace it this way. And I just made a note here. I'm wondering, and again, to your last point, this is a good point. Maybe this isn't, the point that you're attempting to deal with. But my note was, how is that position different from variations, at least, of the Black as a country concept, Garvey's International Pan-African Passport concept, Nkrumah's United States of Africa under scientific socialism? I did mention Newton's intercommunalism and also internal colonialism theory. In other words, I'm just wondering, because all of those perspectives in variation do all of what you say here. That is, Kwame Ture used to say, he was asked by Brian Lamb famously, are you an American citizen? And he said, I carry an American passport. Recognizing this point that you're making, resident in but not citizen of. So I was just wondering what is it in particular about anarchism that does what these other things aren't doing in terms of making that particular point? But again, you've clarified this wasn't your point, so I don't mean to. I just was curious.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I'm not trying to fortify anarchism in a binary and pose it against something else and say that it's doing something that other things cannot do or do not do necessarily. As much as I am saying that, look, I'll talk about it like this. Black anarchism, we just got to this point, right? We just got to this point in time where Black anarchism is even being acknowledged. We're at a point now where, because of the efforts of a lot of different people, including myself, we are able to even be recognized as a part of Black history in the breadth of the Black radical tradition. When we were talking about Black radicalism, even just over 5 years ago, people did not even acknowledge that Black anarchism existed. We didn't have Lorenzo Gamboa Urban's book published. We just got it published in 2020. We didn't have the awareness about Kwesi Balogun. We didn't have the amount of awareness about Ojori Latello. We're doing so much to excavate the legacy of Martin Sostre right now. That's why we have the Sostre Institute. This history has been disregarded and neglected and completely ignored, not just by so many people from this generation, but from generations prior who were around when these things were happening. Just not talked about, just completely discounted and ignored in so many ways. The reason I talk about Black anarchism so much, the reason I talk about Lorenzo Gamboa Urban so much, the reason I talk about Martin Sostre, Ashanti Alston, the reason I talk about these people so much, Janina Urban, Lucy Parsons, is because we have been talking about the Black radical tradition and completely ignoring all of these thinkers. So I'm not trying to turn them into icons that I'm venerating. I'm trying to say, you got to read them too. That's all that's happening. And it's so controversial to some people because they don't like what they're saying, because it counters things and it disturbs these doctrines and these sometimes really overzealous relationships that they have with their politics. And I'm saying that you can't have a complete analysis if you're ignoring all of these Black people who were anarchists and who had anti-state politics and who are autonomous thinkers within these different realms of the left. So when I'm talking about this history, I think that people oftentimes get confused and think that I'm trying to assert a new dogma. They think that I'm trying to assert and create a new orthodoxy. So when we're talking about why I focus on Black anarchism or anarchism, it's because nobody else has been focusing on it. Well, I won't say nobody. Let me not say nobody. Not enough people have been focusing on it in the way that I feel that it should have been recognized as a significant part of Black history and of Black radicalism. That's the whole point. That's the whole intention. So it becomes frustrating to me to hear people say things like, "Oh, I don't like black anarchism because we don't even have all of the people yet. We haven't even pulled all of the stories to the surface yet." There's people who I am just finding out about doing this research. Again, like I'm not in the academy, so I have to do all of this from my own independent means, and try to get resources from academics and things that I can use in terms of other scholars and people who are able to help me find certain pieces of history that I didn't know about. But it's been severely neglected. And so I think that it should be given at least a lot of respect and consideration that it has not been afforded over time. That's why I'm talking about it and emphasizing it in this way in a significant regard. It's not necessarily because I even agree with everything that everybody says, because at the end of the day, I said I'm using it to transcend leftism in its entirety, because that might be a whole other conversation. And I'm not saying that I'm a post-left anarchist, because I know once you say one thing, people they slap a label onto you immediately and they say, "Oh, you're that then." And I'm not saying that either. What I am saying, though, is I think that the left has become a significant limitation for a lot of people's thinking and for a lot of people's organizing, because they have a religious relationship with their politics and they think that they already have it figured out, because they just constantly refer to the same thinkers, to the same people over and over again. When every situation happens on this planet, any predicament that happens, any sort of oppression that happens, they refer to the same 5 to 10 thinkers and say, "Well, X thinker said this, so we got to do that. And Y thinker said this, so that means we got to think this." And I'm saying that is a problematic, at the very least problematic relationship to have with this sort of writing and thinking. This was never supposed to be what these writings were supposed to, the way that they were supposed to serve us. It was not supposed to be religion. It was not supposed to be orthodoxy in this way that many people treat it. So that's what the emphasis is about. It's saying, like, look, there's a whole chunk of Black history here that's being neglected. People who have been disregarded, who've been purged, who've been ignored because they were rank and file, or because they dared to say something to critique leadership, and were kicked out of organizations. Were told that they couldn't be talking about anarchism because that was counter-revolutionary, or it was this, or it was that. There's so many people who had dug their heels into this sort of rigidity that I'm saying that you have to reject and explore. What if this person over here actually had a relevant point that's being neglected about how we can actually engage and struggle and have this fight? You can't just just operate in this really a rigid way that neglects so many of these important parts of our struggles in Black history.
So is there like a centerpiece point made in support of anarchism or Black anarchism that you think is that you could offer up as an example of what is not considered?
In terms of
so when you say there could be all these great points that are just not known or considered, so like if you were making your elevator pitch and somebody said, well, what is it about Black anarchism that you like, the central point about it that should be considered in addition to, if not in replacement of, African-centered Marxist, Leninist, et cetera and so forth traditions, what would that be?
That's a huge question. But I mean, the reality of the situation, I would say for myself, is that I would say that Black anarchism is one of the few places I've seen that actually looks at the whole spectrum of the Black radical tradition and has inspiration and draws from Marxism, from influence from Marxist-Leninism, from Black nationalism, from Pan-Africanism, from anarchism, and also critiques all those things and has an evolution that I feel is very unique. Because the problem I feel also with a lot of this is that there's also just a severe neglect of anarchism in general because of the way anarchism has been characterized historically. And the way we talk about anarchism is very frustrating because the lens through which people understand anarchism is very much through white European kind of well, I'll say it like this. The way people think about anarchism is they think it's just a white politic. They think that it is something that has nothing substantive to offer to people around the world. But the same way that say, for instance, Marxist-Leninism has proliferated amongst different communities around the world, so is anarchism. There's anarchist movement in Japan. There's anarchist movement in Korea. Anarchist movements all throughout South and Central America, through the Caribbean. There's anarchists all over the world who have writings, again, that we have to now kind of try to excavate and pull up more into people's sight so that they can recognize that this is another part of radical history that oftentimes gets glossed over in many ways because of the way that it's discussed. And none of us own the socialist movement. Anarchism has its history and roots in the socialist movement. But the way we talk about socialism is conflating it with statism, and that's just absolutely not true. The socialist movement was a movement of many different factions and of many different thinkers who had different feelings and thoughts about socialism. This is why I qualify and say state socialism when I'm talking about statists who are thinking about the state as the vehicle to bring about socialism, whereas anarchists at the time were talking about anti-state socialism, talking about building socialism outside of the state. And I think that the relevance of that conversation, again, has become increasingly strong because of the dominance of the nation state form, the post-colonial nation state, and its arrival as the dominant state form throughout the world.
Right on. So just quickly, because Coco's about to join us, Hiram, this has got to be among your most disingenuous comments, given that BPM as an entire platform exists to explain these ideologies. And I'm not clear when that hasn't been happening. And as someone who is as invited to participate as you are, I can't believe you are suggesting that there's not enough space to do these things. That's all we do. And I feel like that's all I do. So come on now, do better than that, Hiram. Like, participate. Anyway, speaking of participation, Coco is here. Greetings to you, Coco. Always good to see you. Fresh off of preparation for Contradictions with Coco, right? Contradictions with Coco. You got to unmute yourself, by the way. I can't unmute you.
Confronting Contradictions. Can you hear me?
Confronting. Yes, hear you perfectly.
All right,
Confronting Contradictions with Coco. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to invite you all to begin whatever conversation, however you wanted to begin it. And then I'm going to admittedly take a bio break, as they say, and I'll be right back without interrupting the conversation. But was there a particular point, Coco, that you wanted to start with? Or William, was there a particular question that you wanted to have a response from Coco? Or I'm not entirely clear how we want to begin here, but
I'm open.
Either of you have a preference?
I'm open-minded. There was another point that I definitely do want to address with regard to that history that was being discussed last time about Lorenzo Kambora Urban.
Well, let me say this real quick.
Yeah,
while you introduce that, Coco, do you mind muting while you're not talking?
No doubt.
Because I think there's some background noise. And then William, go ahead and introduce your comment or point, and then Coco can respond when and I'll be right back.
For sure. I think that well, first of all, Coco, it's nice to meet you. I'm glad to be on the show talking with you and having this conversation. I definitely appreciated the fact that you were open to reading this text and that you engaged with it in the way that you did. I think that it definitely made me think a lot about different ways that my writing could be interpreted, or that I could grow as a writer, and ways that I could think about writing things differently in the future. So I appreciate that. I think that critique is good, and that there's always a lot to learn from it. So one of the things I wanted to address, I think that you had raised this point about Lorenzo Kambora Urban and his history in Cuba, and this is a part of this Black anarchist history that comes up a lot for people, and there's, I think, some confusion about it. And so for anybody that's watching that doesn't really know that history, Lorenzo Kambora Urban is he's a founding Black anarchist thinker. He wrote Anarchism and the Black Revolution. But he went through this process. He was in SNCC. He was in the civil rights movement. He was in the Black Panther Party for a time, and then he gets these trumped up charges against him that ultimately lead to him making a decision to flee the country, and he fled to Cuba after hijacking a plane. And when he arrived in Cuba, he was detained, and this becomes a sticking point for a lot of people because there's, I think, questions about his history. And I wanted to say that, Lorenzo he's alive, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen these conversations about his life and what he went through. And he's been on this program. He was on this program, I think, with Joy James. And there's this way that I don't want to go too far in one direction and try and make it seem like I'm trying to speak for him, because, like I'm saying, he can speak for himself. And I want to address the aspect of what you were saying in terms of a counter narrative. You were saying that you wanted to know what the counter narrative was to his story. And so firstly, I'll say I didn't introduce Lorenzo to the world. Lorenzo credits Joy James with introducing his story to a much larger audience. She wrote about him in Imprisoned Intellectuals. And her scholarship did a lot to bring his story to light for folks. And she actually wrote the foreword to his book in this new edition that just came out in 2020. And so with regard to Cuba, I just wanted to try to make some things crystal clear about how I feel like that story gets distorted a lot of the time. When Lorenzo Kambora-Ervin hijacked a plane and flew to Cuba, this was during the era of skyjacking. And the skyjacking era was filled with this phenomenon of people taking control of planes, flying them to Cuba or to other countries, trying to seek political asylum. And he was one of the many people who did this to avoid trumped up charges. So the counter narrative here really comes from I think so much of the actual conversation and exchange that was happening at the time between these governments. And what I would point out is that, I want to say it was in 1969.
William, I'm sorry to interrupt, my man. I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I'm just looking at the clock, and I'm just feeling like if we want time for responses and any exchange, we got to get to a question or a comment. Otherwise,
I would just like to.
I don't mean to be rude, but yeah.
And anyway, to speak, and I mean, we could get past the history, right? I already understand the history, right? Before I even had a criticism of this book, right? I've known for years who Lorenzo Kambora-Ervin is. I've already known what he's written. I've known a lot about Black anarchism for many years. I mean, I'm not coming to this from just reading this book. I bought this book on a genuine level of interest. I didn't buy this book because I wanted to criticize Black anarchism. Actually, matter of fact, on my Twitter, I've actually, countered probably a European who came at the book, right? For the fact that I didn't believe a European had anything to say about the book, but as far as, us as African people, I don't mind having this conversation, right? But so now the first question, obviously, that you have is this fact that, I stated very specifically that, I'm not going to discredit anybody's experiences, right? We all have different experiences. We all have things that we go through. And this is very specific to this one situation right now that we're talking about, which is Lorenzo's experience, right? Okay. So like I've heard Lorenzo speak on this. I've read his book. I've read your book, right? And it's the same conversation. It's the same topic, right? He hijacked the plane. He went to Cuba. He didn't like the hostilities he experienced. And, he even tries to claim that, Robert F. Williams had hostilities there and that he was jailed and forced and then ended up in a European nation, right? Period, right? I understand that part, right? So the question that I had, and the very specific question the specific point that I was trying to make was that, one, when you go into a sovereign nation, a sovereign state, a sovereign country, right, it is not up to us. If I was to go into exile somewhere, it's not up to me, the terms at which I seek asylum, right? Those are not my terms that I get to make, right? When we're seeking help from another sovereign state, right? Another sovereign nation, right? We don't get to make those terms, right? We don't get to be comfortable, right? We don't get to, and then to conflate that with this, counter anti-state, anti-nationalism, that is being done, right? This is what's being done. based on these feelings, right? These emotions that of personal experience that happen, no doubt. I'm not taking away from somebody's personal experience. What I specifically said is that it's only one narrative, right? And when I think about just society, when I think about justice, right, it's not just one-sided. Justice cannot be one-sided, right? So whatever claims that are being made that happened in Cuba, I'm sure there was many factors that existed that I have no way to know because I have not heard the full entire story. So that was the actual thing that I was trying to refer to, is that it's not necessarily the fact that he went there and maybe he did experience some things that he didn't like. And I'm not taking that from him. But the fact is that when we think about what it means for us as people, right, and when we impose ourselves onto others, right, when we assume that we're supposed to take from others, right, because we're entitled, it just feels very entitled, right? And that's the problem that I'm receiving from a lot of this stuff, right? Now, there's no doubt that he has a history in Black liberation struggle. There's no doubt that there is, some work that he puts in. I know that I've attempted to get an understanding of some of the work that he has done prior to hijacking a plane. I don't have any of that information. There is no records of any of the work that he did prior to going to Cuba and becoming a political prisoner and all of the things that he has experienced. So I don't have much to go on. So I'm not making any statements about who he is and his character or anything like that. But I am stating that if we're going to use our personal experiences, and I understand having personal experiences is what brings us to a place where we want to question things and we want to, work through these issues that we have, is fine and fair, right? But the political analysis, right, is a little immature in my opinion, right? Because at the end of the day, right, especially, and then now I can probably bridge into my own criticism of your book, right? And even perhaps Lorenzo's criticism toward Lorenzo as well, because a lot of your ideas do come from him as well. And he's also in the book, right? My whole thing is, right, when we understand nation and nationalism, right? A lot of the arguments that you makes great claim of why we should be nationalists, right? Why being Black, this national identity that we share, right? Why it's important for us to really think about all of the atrocities that are placed onto the Black community, that are placed onto New African people, placed onto African people, right? And for us to collectively organize around those things is a nationalist perspective, right? And when we think about the history in this country of nationalism, it goes back all the way into enslavement times, right? Nationalists didn't just form from Garvey. Nationalism is not just a Garveyite idea, right? We're talking about people were nationalists and used their nationalism to abolish enslavement, right? Nationalism was the abolition of enslavement, right? Not a European idea, not an academic idea, but a nationalist idea, right? And we have many nationalists from that era who spoke to these ideas of what it meant to be a nation, right? So I feel like you're using nationalist perspectives, right? You're using nationalist thinkers or activists, right, to argue against nationalism. And that right there is the biggest contradiction that really frustrates me in this book. And then to use this experience that Lorenzo has to come and in my opinions, attack nationalism is false. It's politically immature. And I think that we have to be realistic about what is at stake here. There is a war going on. I do not live my life in comfort. I live my life under constant surveillance, right? And I do not have the luxury of these ideas, right? Of these, I guess, purist ideas of what it's going to take for us to actually be free. What we have to come to terms with is we are under, we already know what we're under. We already know what has been attacking our people for centuries now, right? We already understand that. Right. And so when you even say that there's too much divisiveness that's happening, and what is Black anarchism doing? It's creating more divisiveness, especially in this book, right? As a nationalist myself, as somebody who is engaged in revolutionary struggle, right? Whose life is at risk every single day because of it, right? And so I feel like these claims, I struggle with these claims. I struggle with a lot that's in the book, and not to say that the book is, doesn't make accurate claims of the condition that we're under, right? The condition, the experiences that we all have, right? Those are accurate analysis, right? But then to say that nationalism is, and you make quite strong claims about nationalism in this book, right? You make a lot of strong claims about nationalism in this book and conflate it with the statist ideas. And statism and nationalism are not the same thing, right? Yes, the nation state does exist. There are nation states that exist, right? But that does not mean nationalism is a problem because of it, right? Nationalism, and I think a lot of times you are presenting this as the nation state of the United States, which is a problem, right? We are not citizens of the state, but we are still economically enslaved under the state, right? So I can understand these arguments, but there are a lot of contradictions, especially with the writers that you choose. Robeson, you have Robeson, you have W.B. Du Bois, you have Malcolm X, nationalists. These are nationalist ideas that these people have. So why are you attacking nationalism when at the end of the day, it's probably the most correct, in my opinion, way for us to struggle in these times, right? Right now, here and now, right? But that's the concrete analysis. That's the concrete science that comes from, right, the work that everybody has done before us. So that's where I'm at. And I'm open to whatever you have to say. I've listened to the program so far. I've listened to, a lot of what you have said about the book. I've read the book several times. So I'm like I said, I'm just struggling here, and I yield.
Well, some of what I was about to say will address some of your points. The first thing I was going to say was that the point that I want to finish about what I was going to say about Lorenzo. One of those resources that you can get to learn more about him and how his history came to more people is going to be Imprisoned Intellectuals by Joy James again. That was a text that introduced him and his history, his background to more people. The other point that I wanted to make is that with regard to Cuba, this is what I was trying to get to when I was talking about the skyjacking era. This is not just Lorenzo. He didn't claim that Robert F. Williams said that he had problems there too. Robert F. Williams claimed that he had problems there. If you look in my book at what I cite, that is actually a documentary that you can go watch where Robert Williams talks about his experience in Cuba and the problems he had with the Cuban government. So you can check that out in the footnotes. He says that for himself. So that's not a claim. That's directly from the horse's mouth. That's Robert Williams, Robert F. Williams. The other thing I was going to say with regard to that is I'm going to give you three perspectives that you can also look into if you want to learn more about the other people who ran into those issues. The first one is from the left. That's obviously Lorenzo, but the other you could also look into this book, Long Time Gone, by William Lee Brent, who was also detained when he fled to Cuba. You can also look into the book Hijack by Anthony Bryant. These are both Black Panthers who was also detained when he went to Cuba. He ended up going far right after his experience in Cuba. He had a kind of opposite reaction of Lorenzo. He ended up becoming extremely right wing. And you can also read Eldridge Cleaver. He actually has an interview with Skip Gates that I think was in the Black Scholar. I'm not sure where that.
Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, my bad, man. This might be my fault. Are these sources to help us understand Irvin's background or the relationship between Black struggle and Cuba? Because I thought I'm trying to make it clear
that Lorenzo is not just some one person who was making these claims about Cuba. I'm trying to tell you and anybody else who
but maybe just because as someone playing the role of an audience member, I thought the question from Coco was, if you're using Irvin to make your argument, the question was about him, his life, his analysis, how he developed his conclusions that would end up impacting yours. So I just wanted to be clear that in these sources, these resources you're listing, that these were about him, as opposed to about, broadly speaking, the relationship between Cuba and the Black liberation struggle, which to me is a separate point not raised by Coco. And if I'm wrong on any of that, either of you can correct me. Otherwise, please continue. And then the question about the nationalism critique.
I'm just giving you more perspectives, just to clarify that this is not an isolated incident. This was an era where a lot of Black Panthers were detained. I'm just giving that history, and I can move forward. I just want to help it be understood that this was happening to multiple people who were fleeing to Cuba, and that they wrote about it, and that there's a lot of history there to understand why Lorenzo is a person who had his experience and drew, the conclusions that he did. It's a part of a whole larger network of people that were fleeing there. And it actually became such an issue that Cuba started negotiating with the Nixon government to be able to extradite and to curb hijackings. They started working with the Nixon government. They had a deal about how to stop these Black radicals, as well as other people who were fleeing to Cuba, around issues of sovereignty and around the state. And that's just the history there.
Right.
So the point that I'll make from there is to say that, what you're pointing out, Coco, I feel like you're making a very conservative argument. The way that you're talking about immigration, and the way that you're talking about asylum seeking, and the way that you're talking about sovereignty is what a lot of people who would classify themselves as conservatives would say about people who are trying to enter the United States to try to seek asylum here. They would say that you can't disrespect this country's borders or its sovereignty and just come in and expect to just be given entitlements. And I'm saying that, you can't just look at a different state and then make these same sorts of conservative arguments about borders and about sovereignty and about people's right to movement. When I'm talking about the nation state, and when I'm talking about sovereignty, and when I'm talking about people traveling around the world and moving around the world, and in terms of nationalism, what I'm trying to point out is that there is there's a connective thing here that should lead us to be questioning if this form of organizing political community is really what's best for people who are vulnerable, who are asylum seekers, who are people who are stateless, who are refugees. I'm not trying to make any arguments that reaffirm borders or that give legitimacy to this sort of nationalism that I pointed out earlier, which is this post-colonial form of the nation state, which is a Western thing. I'm not trying to give any sort of validity to that way of organizing, the world and people. I think it's actually very dangerous, and that it's actually a big risk to think about trying to reaffirm borders and reaffirm and restrict movement in that way.
Your claim is dangerous in this moment because we understand who the enemy is. Your claim right now is dangerous at the moment because we should also understand who the enemy is. We have to sit with reality here, right? The idealism that comes from your argument, right, is great and all, right? We should be working and striving toward that, but we haven't even yet gotten to the point where we have any type of independence. Right? We haven't gotten to the point where we can have a borderless society because of the destruction that continues to plague all of our diaspora, right? Which is fascism, right? Which is I mean, I can go through all of it, right? But at the end of the day, you already know what I'm talking about, right? So I'm not going to just sit here and just, speak for the fact that we already understand what we're under attack, right? So as ideal, right, as a borderless society might be, we are nowhere near that. So let's get with reality here, right? We're at war. There's a war going on, right? And these ideals, right, are not going to take us anywhere. We have to be with reality here, right? And the fact is that, Cuba, right, Cuba has been under attack. So yes, they should be able to protect their sovereignty from anybody that comes into their borders, right? They should be able to protect their sovereignty from anybody, because at the end of the day, you being a Black Panther does not give anybody the right to go into anybody's borders and state what they believe that they should have, right? And this is no disrespect to any of my elders who are former Black Panthers, who are former Black BLA, right? That is no disrespect to them. You feel me? But at the end of the day, we have to be realistic here. Who is our enemy, right? The European nations that attack African society, right? That attack African society on a consistent basis do not care about the words that you put on paper. They care about the fact that they'll easily control and take over our people as they continue to do, right? And so at the end of the day, a sovereign nation and the way they defend themselves, right, as any nation chooses to defend themselves, right? Self-determination should not be determined by an individual or any individuals, because at the end of the day, it's the people within that nation who get to determine that. So these points that you're trying to make are not valid, because at the end of the day, nobody gets to go into anybody's sovereign nation and make determinations for how they should be treated. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to explain. We don't get to just make determinations for other sovereign nations. We get to determine for ourselves how we choose to be defend ourselves, how we choose to live amongst each other, right? And as a nation, as somebody, as myself, who is attempting to, strengthen this idea of nationalism, right? Because nationalism has been under attack, right? And it's for very good reasons, right? Why nationalism has been under attack, right? In regards to the perspective of the oppressor, right? The oppressor nation does not want us unified. Nationalism is a form of unification, right? It's a form to set aside our differences, right? It's a form of us being able to sacrifice, right, our own individual emotions, sacrifice our own individual needs for the greater common good, right? That's a sacrifice not many are willing to make. But that's the point of nationalism, right? Is so that we can determine through amongst all of our differences how to unify, right? And so for you to attack that, right, is in your book, you are attacking it. And let's make no mistake about that. You could be humble all you want. You are attacking that, okay? So, I read your introduction. I noted many times how humble you are. But at the end of the day, you're making very strong points. And they're not valid and they're not useful, right? And like I said, politically immature. And it's fine, right? I'm not sitting here. You don't have to change. I'm not here to change you or your ideas or Black anarchism, right? But a lot of times people have questions about why nationalism is so bad and blah, 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 blah. And then when we see books like this attacking nationalism inaccurately for that, right? I'm not going to sit here and be silent over it. You feel me? Because at the end of the day, like it just doesn't serve any purpose, right? Because again, like I said, there is a war going on. We don't have no time, right? For kind words and humbleness, right? We have time, to be honest with you, to get ourselves together, right? And to really be prepared for what's at stake here, right? Because fascism is growing in popularity. I'm not saying fascism doesn't exist. It's growing in popularity. Our own families support fascism. Our Black families support fascism. So at the end of the day, what are we fighting with? What are we fighting against? I remember somebody came on here on Black Power Media and said, anarchists are pushed to the margins. And I said, y'all push yourselves to the margins, because you're pushing yourselves away from the people, to be honest with you. Because honestly, what is it serving right now for this political analysis to exist? What is it serving? Who is it serving? Right? And so why I bring up the origins of Black anarchism of Lorenzo is because it seems to me that somebody's personal experience came from, these ideas sparked from personal experiences, right? How it has transcended over time has come from personal experiences, which like I said, these ideas are useful, right? When we think about what it means to reform society, right? When we think about what it means to challenge society, right? I'm not saying that all of these ideas are useless, right? But at the end of the day, we have to get real here when it comes down to what we're actually fighting against and how we're going to actually organize to fight. And to be honest with you, it's not a nice or pretty, it's just not that simple, right? And so these ideas frustrate me. The book frustrates me. The contradictions in the book frustrate me. But I'm a yield on that.
Thank you, Coco. Just a time check. So I have class in 15 minutes. I'm more than happy to leave this up and running and go watch with my students. If you all need more time, I don't need to cut it off. I think this is an important discussion. That said, thanks ZZ Lion for your super chat. No, you're just late. You're not lost. You're just late. So thanks for the super chat. Catch up. Start from the beginning when you get a chance. Brother William, let me give you as much time as you like to respond.
You know, I think some of the things I'm saying that I'm trying to convey, I don't know if they're translating right now. I feel like I tried to lay out some things from history and that inform my perspective, and I tried to speak respectfully and thoughtfully about how different people might arrive at different conclusions. But yeah, I mean, there's not too much more. I feel I'm gonna be able to drive home on this point. I'll just say that I do agree that this is a very important and crucial time. And my humility when I speak about these things is not to be disingenuous. It's not to try to protect myself or ward off any sort of attack. It's because of, I think, what is happening right now. I know that this is something that many people are passionate about, and that, like I said, it's a text that will make a lot of people angry. But if the communication isn't going to be productive, and I don't want to get too lost in that. So I mean, I stated,
to be real, this is more than just passion. You feel me? This is not passion, right? This is life. This is life. People's lives are at stake here. This is not just passion. There's no passion in this. This is my life. This is my son's life. This is all the sacrifice, the fact that I don't have family because of my politics. This is because the fact is that my life is not safe when I walk out my door. My life is not safe in my own home at this point. This is not just passion. So please do not reduce it to that.
I'm not reducing it to that. I just said that a lot of people are very passionate about it. I didn't.
It's not passion though. This is not passion. This is the, like I said, there is a war. Our elders and ancestors were under attack for trying to feed their people, for trying to serve their people. This is not passion. This is a war that we are in. That's not passion.
I'm not sure if you realize, but I'm Black living in the US too. Like I don't have any sort of confusion about the conditions or the terms.
But nationalism is not passion, is what I'm trying to get at.
I didn't say nationalism was passion. I said that we're talking about subjects that a lot of people are passionate about. That's not meant to be a personal insult to you.
Passion might be something you study. something you read, somebody you love. But this is not about passion. It's not.
So yeah. Let me just say, first of all, I would like to just say I appreciate. First of all, let me say I appreciate BPM for being here to host this conversation. This is what we in part are here to do. I thank Coco for your bringing the critique and encouraging the discussion. William, I think it is great that you heard the criticism and invited us to engage with you. And I don't mean for this to even, it doesn't even have to necessarily, I feel like there's more that could be said. So this doesn't have to be the end of this particular conversation, though if it does happen to be, we can always pick it up separately or differently going forward as well. William, did you have anything? Let me let you. I feel rushed here, unfortunately. I apologize. But if the intent is that you to not continue, if you feel like there's no value to that, then we can wrap it up here. And William, if there's anything else you wanted to conclude with, let me give you a chance to do that. And Coco, I can do the same for you as well. And then we'll just jump out of here and reconvene another time. But William, just from my point of view, I appreciate you coming through, and thanks for engaging the discussion. And yeah, with that, go ahead.
Just want to encourage people to read the work with an open mind. If you want to reach out to me, you can always email me. My email is on my website. If you have any questions or anything you want to clear up, I can always try to help folks do that. That's pretty much it. I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, y'all be safe.
Right on. Likewise. Coco, any last thoughts for today? I appreciate you, Coco. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I just don't think that there was anything that could be, resolved in this conversation, right? So I just feel like, I don't feel like, William, I don't feel like you're very open as myself, as much as you probably think I'm not as open. So I don't feel like there is any resolve in this conversation. I was asked to be here, so I came, right? So at the end of the day, there's a lot of, I know you wanted to respond to some things. You even said some things that we all were listening to before I got on that was inaccurate. And I think that was what Dr. Ball was saying. He didn't think he did something. And it was like, that never actually happened. But it just, I'm not here to fight with people, right? Like I said, I'm literally like, I put my life on the line for the work that I do. So I'm not really here to fight with people. Like I said, you can have your ideas, you can have, I would say leave nationalism out of it, because honestly, you're wrong. But at the end of the day, like I said, some things can't be resolved, and everybody's going to, fight the struggle the way they choose and they please. But it does not serve us to be like this, right? Like, we are very few in number. And, and not to say that we're all going to be, get along and, but we have to figure out what we're going to do now. Once we have, some type of independence to choose for ourselves, some type of self-determination to choose for ourselves how we live our lives, then maybe we have the opportunity to be a little bit more open to these ideas. But I just don't see that happening right now, as far as like, the type of enemy we're up against, right? So, but like, I wishing everyone well, and wishing you well, to be honest. So, no animosity, no ill, I'm not out here in these streets talking about people. So, like I said, I just speak to what I know and, keep it moving from there. So that's it.
Right on. Thank you, Coco. Thank you, William Anderson. Appreciate you for coming through. Yeah, I appreciate everything. So thanks to you both. Take good care. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like I know you both are. As Fred Hampton used to say, catch you another time. Thank you both. All right, everybody. Big shout out to our guests. I really appreciate the exchange. I really appreciate that we can have this discussion, as uncomfortable as it may be at times. I think it's essential. We got to be able to disagree. We got to be able to have a conversation. We got to be able to vet each other's ideas. And that rapier knife comment from the late great Sophia Bakari is exactly what I think is necessary. So anyway, thanks everybody. Appreciate you for coming through. If you saw this live, if you didn't, if you see this here later, appreciate you as well. Please like, share, subscribe, join the channel, support in any way you can, support blackpowermedia.org. Especially, and we'll catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like It throughout the platform. Again, peace if you're willing to fight for it, only if you're willing to fight for it. Like Fred Hampton used to say, catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like. And in the meantime, free them all. Peace.